Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now my first foray into the world of The Witcher was with Wild Hunt, and I'm ashamed to say that I have never had any past experiences with the first two games. Since watching the Netflix show, I've had a sudden urge to get back into the video game series, and I plan to start at the very beginning. After taking a look back at some of the original reviews for both the first and second games, and reading many opinions regarding the pros and cons of each, it wasn't just the story, gameplay and atmosphere that was being talked about. What really stood out was how well, or how not very well, The Witcher 2, the second installment in the series, ran on PCs. Released in May of 2011, then again as the Enhanced Edition 11 months later, all owners of the original copy received free upgrades to the Enhanced game, which featured over 10 gigabytes of new content that expanded the story, included all DLC, and fixed various bugs. That's all well and good, but you still needed a PC that could handle it, unless you opted for the Xbox 360 release. At first, a quick glance of the minimum and recommended system requirements wouldn't really put me at any unease. The recommended requirements don't sound too demanding, even for 2012 standards, and the minimum requirements, well, even better. But keep these in mind for future reference. It's clear why it gave hardware a hard time at higher settings. I think it looks fantastic now, so 2012 me would have certainly been in awe at the visuals, and as I admired my computer, which I believe featured a dual-core AMD A4-3300 APU at the time, would have wept. Like with any PC game, it's important to manage your expectations when choosing graphical settings, despite the temptation to stick everything on max and suffer in silence at the unstable frame rates. This mid-range HD 6850 from 2010 can easily handle the game at 1080p low, with around 60 frames per second. It can even handle 30 plus FPS with the Ultra preset, just about, but there will be some dips here and there to be expected. But there is one setting that is not to be toyed with, one setting that turns this game into what I'd like to formally coin a PC melter, and that is Oversampling. Back in 2011, I believe TechSpot wrote that with the ultra settings and Oversampling on, there is no single graphics card that will provide playable performance at resolutions above 1680 by 1050. 1680 by 1050 was a very common resolution back in the day. Even at this resolution, their GTX 590 managed just 36 FPS, with weaker cards hitting well below 30. So what is Oversampling? Well, this option means that your system has to render everything multiple times before displaying, completely eliminating any pesky jagged edges and texture filtering issues. That explanation came from Digital Foundry. My favourite explanation though comes from a random internet stranger who just said in a forum that it makes everything look way better but cuts your frame rate in half. It's a brutal anti-aliasing solution that is great for screenshots, but not so great for gameplay. These days you could use something like AMD's virtual super resolution technology or Nvidia's DSR to create a similar effect. The game will be rendered at a higher resolution and then scaled down to your display res, eliminating jagged edges just the same. But I couldn't resist trying out Oversampling in The Witcher 2 on modern hardware just to see what we can expect. First, let's look at the 6850 performance again. As you can see, the frame rate has pretty much been cut in half, and it's clear that anyone who was expecting acceptable frame rates on a card like this back in 2012 would have been in for a nasty surprise should they have enabled this option by mistake. It was at this point I decided to swap the card out for something more modern. Although The Witcher 2 was too much for top GPUs back in 2012, surely it's no match for the likes of, I don't know, a Vega 64 for example, a card that still tears through pretty much any new title with 60 FPS at high or ultra settings. With the 1080p Ultra preset here, we were seeing a pretty solid frame rate throughout. This combat scene did very well, and 60 FPS was an easy target. Busier, foliage covered areas like this forest, however, did drop things a bit in terms of the frame rates, but we didn't go below that magic number. So what about our old friend Oversampling? Let's say you want the absolute best Witcher 2 graphical experience and you've got an 8GB Vega 64 or similar at your disposal. What can you expect? Well, say goodbye to 60 frames per second. In fact, say goodbye to 30 if the action heats up, as 28 was the lowest in this particular scene. A gentle stroll through the forest with Oversampling on also proved to be very intensive, and this is certainly an option you should keep off if you want a 60 FPS experience even in 2020 with this 8-year-old game. Don't get me wrong, 60 FPS is still achievable in some areas and in very brief spells, but a closer to 30 FPS experience is far more common. Some indoor areas will even drop as low as 25 with this card. Just take a look at this tavern scene. We are really suffering here in terms of performance. I mentioned before that you can use AMD's VSR or Nvidia's DSR to render the game at a high resolution and scale it to your display. Some may say this makes Oversampling obsolete, and I'd be inclined to agree, especially when you can use these methods to eliminate all the jagged edges just the same by, for example, rendering the game in 4K on a 1080p monitor. 60 FPS still isn't doable, but the result is a more pleasant one, as you can see by this footage. I believe that The Witcher 2 has rightfully earned the title of a PC melter, metaphorically of course, but it's clear that this masterpiece will need some serious hardware to run at the absolute highest settings even now. My only advice would be to keep Oversampling firmly off and experiment with AMD's VSR or Nvidia's DSR options first, before even running in a native 4K res. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, the first in a series of games that I will be calling PC melters, games that when cranked all the way up will struggle. We'll be investigating why they struggle and what you can do to get similar graphical results with better performance. As for this video, well, if you did enjoy it, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and anyone with a 2080 Ti out there, please let me know if you can run this at 4K resolution or at 1080p resolution with Oversampling enabled. I'd love to hear what sort of frame rates you're getting. Thank you, and I'll see you all in the next one.